Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the podcast. I'm Angela, and don't forget to subscribe if you like this podcast. It helps get it out there. And today you are going to be thrilled because I'm going to introduce you to Henry Cameron Allen. And I met him uh, because I was a guest on his podcast, the Lost Travelers podcast. And I learned so much from him in that actual interview that I just had to invite him back to be a guest on mine. And there is just so much wisdom here to share. And he has a really great way of explaining the process of grief. And he's a professional grief counselor, helping individuals navigate the complexities of grief and preventing them from being overwhelmed by its weight. In 2006, he founded the Brain Candy Project. It's a charitable organization that serves parents who are living in hospital with their critically ill children. And this vision helped evolve in the fall of 2019 into the first of its kind exclusive travel club for parents who have outlived their children, the Lost Travelers Club. And he is an author and has written the Last Traveler's Field Guide and Workbook. And it's a really cool book because it weaves together science, spirituality, and the potential of the human mind and heart, and reframes and reimagines the grief journey from a finite experience to a transformative evolution, which you all know this podcast is all about. Helping grief walkers find peace and purpose again. So I just know you're going to be inspired by hearing all about his journey and his transformation. And so, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Angela. It's so good to see you again.
Yeah, you too. So I know that was kind of a summary, but just give the listeners just a little bit more background on how you got to do what you're doing now.
Yeah, in 2008, my son Cameron passed from brain cancer at age 13 after a 2-year journey. I'm a cancer survivor myself, and it took our experience to a whole other level in terms of understanding that, like Cameron said it best. He said, Papa, nobody has an expiration date on the bottom of their foot. Nobody knows the day or the way. We all know we're going to go, but we can't define when that's going to be or how. And whether somebody goes from cancer or whether they go from an accident or even by their own hand, it's how you live your life now that matters. And and that was really inspiring. And I think that my having survived cancer, um, which was before he was born, so since he could understand language, he knew about that. And when he received his diagnosis, understanding that I had survived it was kind of a no-brainer for him. Well, if Papa could survive it, everything's possible, right? And so he didn't experience the kind of angst and fear and depression and even rage that he was certainly entitled to have. And there was a day, he was 12 years old. It was August, a beautiful late summer day. And we were in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and we went on a picnic overlooking the Mississippi River. We had just gotten a clean MRI. There was no indication yet that the cancer had returned or was returning. And so I said to him, in just a few months, you're going to be 13, and that's a big deal whether you have cancer or not. And I grew up in the Jewish faith, and I said to him, I had a bar mitzvah, which marked the transition across the threshold from childhood into being a young man. And I said, I'd like to have some kind of coming of age event for you to celebrate this. It could be a bar mitzvah if you want one. It could just be a big party to celebrate you. Or it could be a project that you create that shows your community that you're stepping up into the world in a different way and having an effect. And he said, I know exactly what I want to do, Papa. And we talked about this idea for the Brain Candy Project, as you mentioned. He said, you think of eye candy as something that's easy on the eyes. Well, brain candy is something that's easy on your brain. And when we were in the hospital, we saw many, many families on the ward who were coming from far away to get the best care possible to save their children. And they had no local community at all to support them. Hospitals are concerned with their patients, not their patients' parents necessarily or caregivers. And so there are very few resources in hospitals. Some do better than others, granted. There are some amazing hospitals that have support services for caregivers and for parents. But where we were, it was hardly there. And so he wanted to create a foundation where they didn't even have to think about it, where we would provide them with food, clean clothing, laundry services, parking, pay for their parking at the hospital. He
Hmm.
couldn't believe it. I certainly couldn't that you get charged for parking when you're living in a hospital. You're not choosing to be
Yeah.
there, but somebody's benefiting off of someone else's misfortune, and we don't like that. So he had this idea to form the Brain Candy Project to relieve the minds of parents who are far from home, being the community that they didn't have locally. And the tagline he came up with was holding parents so parents can hold their children.
Oh, wow.
I mean, seriously, what 11-year-old, 12-year-old thinks like that?
Yeah.
So we started it, and part of that vision was a magazine called Brain Candy to be written by and for kids living with critical or terminal illness because that journey is very isolating. Your friends often can't visit you in the hospital because, if somebody has a cold and your immune system's compromised, it could do some great damage. And so he wanted to form bonds amongst kids who are struggling for their lives. And so it was a big vision. um, Over the course of time after he passed, um, I set out on a quest to find language that didn't exist yet around being a grieving parent. A word like widow or orphan that we could turn to so that we didn't have to crowbar open our chest and pour out our most sacred personal pain to somebody who couldn't possibly receive it unless they had already been through it themselves, God forbid. So um, there's a story that I love to tell because it was transformative for me. It was maybe 4 months after Cameron transition, and I needed to feel my smallness again. I needed to get my scale back. I had to be a superhero for 2 years, and that I was exhausted physically, emotionally, psychically. And the closest I could find to where we were in Minneapolis, where I could feel that in my imagination, was the Grand Canyon. So I took a road trip to the Grand Canyon. Have you ever been there?
No, I haven't.
It's otherworldly. And what people don't realize, I mean, pictures don't do it justice. You really have to go, put it on your bucket
Mhm.
list. But there's 70 miles of desert between civilization and the canyon, and no gas stations. They urge you to fill up before you head into the wilderness, right? And so I was on that stretch, and it was about 3 in the morning, and I needed a cup of coffee or something to just keep me going. But all I could see were the stars and the lights on the road, and that was it. Everything else was inky black. But there was a bright light on the horizon, and I was hoping it was a gas station or a convenience store or something, a little town. But it was just this little alcove of three buildings. The light was a 100-foot tall lamppost, and in the beam, there was a little motel. There was an indigenous trading post, Zuni tribe, I believe, and there was a post office. Nothing else for miles and miles and miles around, but it had its own zip code. And I looked up at the post office, and it was Cameron, Arizona.
Oh, wow.
Total Twilight Zone moment. Feeling like I was guided there, right? And so I caught 40 winks in the motel, and I woke up, and the trading post was open, and there was an elder sitting on her blanket selling the jewelry that she had made. I bought this beautiful opal ring from her that she made.
Wow.
She obviously had a lot of wisdom. And I asked if I could sit and have a conversation with her, and she said, sure. So I sat down and I said, listen, my son passed away just a few months ago. I'm having a bit of an existential crisis. I don't really get yet who I am. I've lost my sense of purpose. I've lost my way, and there's no language. I looked. I looked in dead languages. I looked in ancient languages, modern languages, all over the world, and there was no word to describe who I was. Is there anything in your language or culture that holds that piece? She said, well, in my culture, your name would change because your name is the expression of your identity. And when you've outlived a child, your identity is changed forever. And so I might introduce you as Henry, whose son is gone. I would introduce you to new people that way. If you're not around and we're talking about you, oh, I saw Henry, whose son is gone at the market the other day. Even if they're thinking about you, they hold you with your new identity. And I thought, oh, what a beautiful expression, and way to hold parental grief. For me, it didn't quite fit into the global lexicon. I didn't want to go around introducing myself as Henry, whose son is gone. Um, and so what I found instead was, how sometimes when people marry, they hyphenate their last names to show that they're still individually who they are, but they're bonded, right? I
Great.
wanted that bond with Cameron. When one's child passes, you rarely hear their name spoken again, even by
Mhm.
family members. They don't want to upset you. They don't want to upset themselves. It's a hard thing, very heavy to hold. And so I hyphenated his name with mine because I missed that frequency of his name in the world. And it's Henry Cameron. That's what people call me now. That's my name. They all over the world, they call me Henry Cameron, and I hear it all the time, and it just makes my heart sing. But it's also a mathematical equation, isn't it? It's Henry
Mhm.
minus Cameron in the physical sense.
Right. Oh,
If
wow.
Henry Sun is gone, it's my way of doing that. Until that quest to find language around it changed. And I can tell you that story too. But
Yes. And I do
that's
want
why I
you to
hyphenate my
tell.
name, Henry
I
Cameron. But
know the story, but I definitely want you to tell the story because I think that it is huge for people, especially parents that have lost a child.
yeah, there's a shift happening, and there needs to be a shift happening in our identity, um, which is why I think language is very important. And so I was looking for something universal that was non-gendered. I mean, you could say widow and widower, right?
Mhm.
Orphan is non-gendered. You can be an orphan if you're male or female,
Right.
or anything in between. So that was the quality I was looking for. Um, and one of the symptoms that I experience is with my complex post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. I don't call it stress disorder, though. I call it spiritual development. Who wants to live with a stress disorder? So
Yeah.
my PTSD is post-traumatic spiritual development.
There you go.
Uh, and one of the symptoms of that is sleep paralysis, and it usually happens around milestone days. Um, and at first, it was very frightening because I thought, am I dead? Am I in a coma? Am I having a stroke? I didn't know because I was in my sleep state. I was dreaming and I knew I was dreaming. I wanted to wake up, but I couldn't open my eyes and I couldn't wiggle a toe. I couldn't move. I was literally paralyzed in my dream state. I couldn't break out of it. And that was scary.
Yeah.
But then I finally broke out of it. And next milestone, it happened again. And it was still disconcerting, but I decided to lean into it and see what happened. And invariably, wisdom started coming to me in my dream state that I was able to bring back across the threshold into my waking state. And I realized that it was my body's way of protecting me from waking triggers that would normally happen during milestone days, birthdays, holidays, you know, whatever. And I loved that. And I found gratitude for that, for my body knowing how to protect me.
Hmm.
Because if I'm in my dream state, I have full control. They are my dreams, right? If there's
Right.
something dark that looms, I can pull a magic wand out of the sky and turn it into a cupcake and eat it, right? I can do
Right.
anything. I can fly, right? Um, and and so I brought that back across, that feeling of, well, wait a minute, if I can control that world, and I think they're both equally real when we talk about reality. No scientist on the planet can tell you whether your dream state is what's real or your waking state. And often our waking state feels like a dream or a nightmare in some
Hmm.
cases. So, but the difference is that we find full control. We have access to full control in our dream state because they are our dreams after all. And I found that over time with practice, I have very similar control, maybe not the magic wand stuff, but I have similar control in my waking state, having explored that. And in one of these paralysis epiphanies, I call them, a peregrine falcon swooped down out of the sky and landed in front of me, looked up and said, "It's time." And I knew exactly what it meant. And I broke out of my paralysis and I started Googling the word peregrine. I knew what a peregrine was, but I wondered what its symbolism was. And I wondered what the word originally meant. And in ancient Latin, it meant lost traveler. It meant a stranger in a field. It meant a pilgrim on a sacred journey. And it's native to every continent except Antarctica. So it's universally recognized as a symbol. And symbolically, in most cultures, it represents the same thing: courage, strength, and resilience. All the things that we need to tap into, whether or not we have outlived our children. If you're experiencing any kind of grief, if you've survived any kind of grief, you have to tap into those qualities. And so it made sense to me that peregrine is the word, like widow or orphan, that we can turn to. Now, when somebody says, "Do you have any kids?" I can say, "Oh, well, I'm a peregrine." And they say, "What does that mean?" And I get to talk about that. And I get to choose and be in control of who I open my chest to,
Right.
right? And tell that deeper story. Um, So that was the beginning of something. I had already changed the name. You mentioned that the Brain Candy Project evolved into the Lost Travelers Club. So read, when I studied the etymology of the word peregrine and it said lost traveler, I was like, what? I mean,
Yeah.
make this stuff up. Um, and so I changed the branding of the Lost Travelers Club. It makes sense that a traveling bird, right, be the symbol
Yeah.
of the Lost Travelers Club. Um, and we've all felt at one point or another like a lost traveler, and that was the closest I had ever found to describing what it feels like to have outlived a child. You feel like a lost traveler. And the first thing to go, at least it was for me, and I know many people that I work with now, is your sense of purpose. Why am I here? Why am I even here? Why wasn't it me? Right? All the whys. And so our tagline is grief reimagined, purpose empowered. And you mentioned that the Lost Travelers Club started out to be a travel group for parents who have outlived our children. That was before COVID. COVID kind of put that idea on hold for a while. And so it's become really more of an empowerment organization, different from other kinds of support groups, because we talk about reimagining, reframing the grief journey. You look in any dictionary at the word grief, and I ask all of your viewers and listeners to go and look it up. You're not going to find one positive associated with grief. It's all about depression and bereavement and sorrow and, all the words. And that's not how I've come to feel about grief. And I do feel like there's another option here that people are not talking about. And I've coined the term super grief that is above and beyond what we've been taught and programmed that grief has to be. It, in an alchemical way, transforms that sorrow into a tool for transformation, right? It allows grief to become a friendly companion on our life's journey, to become a teacher, to open us up to more than we thought we could be. And so every month I do a virtual super grief retreat through the Lost Travelers Club for anyone, not just parents who have outlived kids, not peregrines, but it's for anyone who's struggling with the burden and the weight of grief. You talked about the heaviness of it. Grief and gravity share the root word. It's heavy. There's no way around it. It's always going to be heavy. But just like when a mother is carrying a child in her womb, and that is also very heavy, you carry that burden with love. And that's how I've come to experience grief. Men obviously don't have the equipment to carry a child in the womb until we have outlived our children. Then we develop, I don't know, I call it kind of like a soul womb, where we are carrying our child inside of us, right? I want to get away from using the word loss because I didn't lose him. I know precisely where he is. He's not a set of keys or a favorite scarf that I can't find. I know where he is. He's in here. He's living in and through me. And so in that soul womb, right, there's a gestation, just like a real living child. Except what you're birthing into the world, whether you're male or female, is not a new nervous system carrying, the being, the consciousness that you become. You're rebirthing yourself into the world in a new way. And that's as powerful, can be as powerful and as beautiful as a live birth of a child. You're rebirthing yourself through your child. And it's just magnificent. A
Yeah. Yeah. You explain
lot to
that
wrap
so
your
well.
mind around, but
Yeah. Well, yes, absolutely. And especially if you're in the initial throes of that grief process, it's a lot. But
right.
I always thought, and I still think that, listening to stories like yours can be really inspiring, at least allow you to believe that there is hope, that there can be a better day coming when you're in that. Because, a lot of the messages that I got early on were, you know, you're going to carry this forever. Sure, he's going to be gone forever. But if I was going to feel the way I felt for the rest of my life,
Yeah.
I wasn't going to want to live that.
A lot of people don't. A lot
No.
of Most people, I would venture to say, don't want to live that way. And that's why I feel called to this work. That's why I wrote the book, The Lost Traveler Field Guide, which just received the 2025 International Impact Book Award.
I did see that.
So it's about
Congratulations.
thank you. It's about putting it out there in a way that people can receive it. And, there's that old adage, when the student is ready, the teacher appears, right? And I feel that with the Lost Traveler's Field Guide, people say there's no map, right? There's no map for grief. But the reason I called it a field guide is because you can always go to the 7-Eleven, right, to the convenience store and get, if you're on a road trip, you can get the field guide that shows you off the beaten track places that aren't on the map, right? So these are off-road ways of holding and looking and processing your grief journey, which is unique to you. Grief is a solitary journey. There may be people on the path ahead of you, behind you, and walking beside you, but it's yours alone. That makes it harder when you're coupled, right? Because
Yes.
the couple is going to experience their own grief differently, and nobody's teaching how to hold the other's grief while you're dealing with your own.
No.
Not that I've seen. Uh, and so I wanted to provide some of that. Um,
Yeah. And you did. Absolutely.
I
And
hope.
I know a lot of people um, will want to check that out. There is a lot of wisdom in there for sure.
Thank you.
I guess the other thing I want to ask about, because I did see that you have Cameron's Feast. I think that's what you call it. Can you tell us
Right.
a
It's
bit
in
about that?
tomorrow.
Okay.
Um, you know, people use celebratory language, I think, around the passing of a loved one. And I don't necessarily feel comfortable calling it an anniversary, an angelversary, a heavenly birthday, right? There are phrases like loss too that keep people in what I call a vortex of mourning that makes it really hard to break out of. It's like, you're staying in a certain headspace, especially around what I call milestone days. I don't call them anniversaries. They're milestones, they're time markers. They are times to sort of sit back and reflect. Um, and they're heavy, as grief is. And so to lean into that heaviness, to accept it, is really, I think, the way to embrace the healing qualities of grief. Not that we'll ever be healed, right? You're not going to wake up one day and say, "Oh, I'm not grieving anymore." Da, 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 da.
Yeah.
Right? I'm free. No, no, that's never going to happen. So, the milestones are sacred. I see them as sacred days. And so rather than use that sacred time to reflect on, oh, he would have been this, he would have been doing that, he would have been, and I look at his peers and they all have kids and they're all, doing their thing. That's for me not a place I wanted to hang out. And so I called it Cameron's Feast. Cameron loved food. In fact, he had talked about becoming a food critic at some point as an adult, as a career. And so the invitation, it's an international feast. So anyone who hears of Cameron, who knew him in person or knows me and knows of him, we light a candle, we have a great meal, your favorite food. You nourish yourself. You light a candle in honor of not just Cameron, but anyone you love who's passed. And we reflect on the fragility of life and the strength and resilience of the human spirit. And it's just a moment of pause, to breathe into that moment, to hold it, not just for Cameron. That's who he was. And so I love celebrating him that way, celebrating his life, that he was here at all, that I got to have 13 years with this amazing soul, right? So for me, it's a celebration, but it's also an opportunity for everyone to remember him and those they've loved and to just reflect on that spirit of nobody has an expiration date, right?
Yeah.
Um, I also have used it to raise awareness about the Lost Travelers Club and also the new folklore theater company, which was inspired by Cameron. I mean, it wouldn't exist had he not transitioned. And this is a theater company that I founded in 2011 in Gloucester, Massachusetts. It was a brick and mortar theater, and it preserves and protects the stories that are dying with the people that carry them. They're not teaching local or ancestral history at home in schools anymore. Kids are feeling lost. And how do we know who we are if we don't know where we come from? And so I've built a whole theater company around this. The core of the company is the folk heart, and we develop new works. We look and salvage and rescue stories, but then we're also writing stories for the next 7 generations at least to carry forward that are born of the time that we're in, new folklore. And we're completely a virtual theater company. 100% of the proceeds from the campaign go to pay the artists for their labor, for their work. We forget the work that goes into creating art, whether you're streaming something on a website or YouTube or whatever. There's artistry, there's training, there's craft, there's emotional labor that goes into the creation of these, not just from the actors, but from the writers, the director, the designers, the engineers, the camera people, all of it. And so the New Folklore Theater is an audio theater company that preserves these through audio theater experiences that are very cinematic in a way, but they're interactive with the audience. Nobody is telling you what the princess looks like or the monster or the king, right? The child or the inner child that's listening gets to cast those characters themselves. And we talk a lot in our industry about representation in our time, that people with disabilities, people of color, people of different genders and sexual orientations are not being represented well or adequately for the most part. And so whoever the listener is gets to represent themselves. And that's a beautiful interaction between art and the audience. And so I'm using Cameron's Feast this year to bring a stream into of awareness into the new folklore theater company. It's completely virtual. We have you ever heard of the platform Go Brunch?
Well, I have because I was on your website.
It's new. It's fairly new.
Hmm.
And it operates in a similar way to Zoom, except it's not the Brady Bunch squares that are in your face the whole
Right.
time,
Yeah.
which is exhausting. After COVID, I don't care if I ever see Zoom again. No, no offense, Zoom. We're on Zoom right now. I hope the Zoom gods are not going to strike me now. But for those people who are tired of this kind of a format, for people who are tired of algorithms and social media, because there are none in Go Brunch, you're in little bubbles, you're in little circles in a unique space that is created by the person who's hosting it. So I have the Lost Travelers Club and the virtual retreats are in Go Brunch. The New Folklore Theater Company is in Go Brunch. My design work as an artist. I'm a digital artist and I build worlds in this platform. That's in Go Brunch as well. My counseling services and practice are all in Go Brunch. So it's new. I'm really happy to talk about it because I want more people to come in and visit and see that there's an alternative to social media. There's an alternative to Zoom. It really feels like a community. It feels like you have one-on-one conversations. It's like when we were kids and we would walk down the street in our neighborhood and we would knock and say, Mrs. Jones, is Bobby at home? Can he come out to play? Right? So you can find people that you know, your friends in there, and they're sitting in their space that they've created, and you're having a face-to-face conversation like this, except you're in a little bubble, and it's great.
Yeah. That's amazing. I encourage people to check that out because I did pop into your Go Brunch space and looked around. So it's pretty
Hey,
cool. It's pretty
well,
cool.
we should hang out there sometime because it's super
Yeah.
fun. I have listening parties. We play music. We, talk philosophy and
Yeah.
again, I do all my work there now.
Mm.
I live in Spain. I'm in a tiny little remote village. I haven't seen an airplane in the sky in over 5 years. I mean, that's how remote we are. But we have, fiber optic cable and Wi-Fi, so I can work internationally. It's community without borders,
Hmm.
and there are no controls, there are no algorithms to navigate, and it's not text-based either, right? So
Yeah.
it really feels more human and humane.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Love that. Yeah. So tell us a little bit more about, where people can find all of this that you're offering. And we'll definitely put it in the description as well.
Well, there are a couple of portals in that I suggest. If you're interested in the Folklore Theater Company, the new Folklore Theater Company, just go to the website folklore.love. That's all it is. LOVE, not .com, not .org, folklore.love. Love is my pronoun, as you can see. Um, we need more love in the world. So I was thrilled when I found that that was a URL you could use. Um, and that'll take you to the theater. We do regular events there. Every Saturday, we have a movie matinee club where we screen mostly classic films and we talk about how relevant they still are and have really intelligent conversations. It's like a film study class. And then we also do public readings and events there at the theater. Um, and then the other one is virtualhermit.love. Why virtual hermit? Well, I'm so remote here in Spain, and somebody was asking me, "Do you ever get out? Do you ever have a social life, Henry?" And I said, "Well, I'm virtually a hermit." And I thought, oh, that might be a cool name for my design work that I do, Virtual Hermit Designs. And so I have formed this character, Hermie, the hermit, and I've got this beautiful little hermit cottage in the woods. And if you go to virtualhermit.love, it'll take you there. And that's my central office. So if I'm not there, there's a chat bot and you can book a time to sit with me and talk about whatever. My calendar is there. If you're interested in the Super Grief virtual retreat, which is monthly, it's the first Sunday of every month. That also happens in Go Brunch in a dedicated space. Um, if you're interested in counseling or therapy around grief and survival, that my practice is there as well. I started a new program for kids. We have a great lack of mentors in the world,
Mhm.
and my overarching life purpose is universal life skills education. And so I call this program LEAP, LEAP, which stands for Life Evolving Adaptive Potential. Kids are not being taught how to adapt to this rapidly changing world. And so to root them in themselves and to build their confidence in a way that they can meet the world on their terms is what it's really about. And I have clients, proteges, I call them, from Abu Dhabi to London to New Jersey. And it's in Texas too. And it's just it's a beautiful gesture, but it's also I build a unique room for each of my proteges that represents them. I want them to feel safe and comfortable in their own environment that reflects who they are, right? And those environments evolve and adapt as they do, right? So it's kind of an organic process, and yet it's tied to technology. So here's a good way to use technology in a
Right.
way that serves our humanity.
Right.
Um, yeah.
Yeah. Amazing. Well, is there anything else you want to add before we wrap up? Anything you think we missed?
Gosh. Well, you talked about the Lost Travelers Club being a travel organization, and that was the original intent. Now that I am settled here in Spain and I have my residency legally, I'm inviting people to come have retreats if they're able. I'm not at a point yet where I can offer financial support to get people here.
Mhm.
I want people to come here and disconnect from the day-to-day world and the pressures and the family and friends saying, "Why aren't you over it yet?" And delve into not only as I address in the Lost Travelers Field Guide, looking at grief through a different kind of lens, right? Through a quantum lens, which, as you said so beautifully, it sort of overlaps science and spirituality and the workbook is really important to talk about too because that personalizes the journey. People think quantum physics, quantum theory. I can't wrap my poor
Mhm.
brain around it. but it's presented as a metaphor. And it basically just means that it's unexpected, this journey. You don't know what's coming, you don't know how it's going to hit you. And we know, those of us in this industry of grief therapy, that the stages of grief, the Kubler-Ross stages of grief, no longer hold sway, and they haven't for a long time, because grief is not linear.
Mhm.
It's not predictable. It acts more like quantum entanglement. And that means that if you have a particle here, say it's you, and you have a particle here, say it's your loved one, your child, your parent, your pet, your friend, your partner, what quantum theory has proven conclusively is that two particles can interact with one another across vast different distances, even universes. And it's through those different dimensions that we still are connected, that everything in the universe is interconnected. This has been proven as science, right? This is what we know to be true today. It may expand, it's always expanding, the wisdom. But what we know today is that for me, quantum physics has proven to me that death, as we've been taught it is an illusion, right? That if we think of ourselves as vibration, frequency, what makes you, you, Angela, what makes me, is not our physical body. What
Right.
makes our loved ones who they are was not their physical body. It's something much more. And that can't be created, it can't be destroyed, it just changes its form. And we have the capacity to find the frequencies that they are now and still include them and communicate with them, allow them to communicate with us. How many of us have seen signs or have felt something or heard a song or, whatever? That is communication, that is real. And I've studied this for now several years, and that's what prompted the book. My next book, Super Grief, The New Frontier, is what happens once you've been through all those dimensions, not in a linear way, right? Because you could go
Mhm.
from the first, stage of that. Well, I hate to use the word stage, but
Yeah.
the first moment where grief happens is what in quantum physics it's called dimension zero. And that's what they call the Big Bang.
Mhm.
The universe has exploded into something unrecognizable from what it was. And those of us who have experienced intense, complex grief, that first moment when you hear your loved one has passed, whether it was expected or not, your universe explodes in your face. Your
Mhm.
ears are ringing, you're in physical shock, right? And then you somehow, some way, sometime you move into a different dimension, which we call mourning. And mourning is different than grieving. Mourning is temporary and passive. You can do nothing with it but be in it. You're unaware that anyone else around you is mourning or grieving, right? You're so
Mhm.
in your mourning. That's that vortex of mourning that I talk about. It's like you're just in a spin until you come to that dimension where you cross through a very thin membrane into grieving. Unlike mourning, which again is temporary and passive, grieving is permanent and active. You can channel it into good things. You become aware of others around you who are grieving. You join groups, you form groups, right, of people who can relate at whatever frequency you are at, whichever dimension you are in. And so this gently takes you through 13 dimensions, Angela, of quantum grief. And so super grief is what's beyond those 13 dimensions. Once you have a sense and of equilibrium, your balance to a degree, and you ask yourself what's next, that's where super grief comes into play. And part of that I'm introducing in this book. Um, is grief gardening, is actually using the act of gardening as a tool for understanding the cycles of life and death, of affecting that cycle, of seeing your own power, of getting your hands in the earth that you're part of, not separate from nature. You're part of it. Whether it's a container garden on your balcony or whether you have land, you can pour your grief into nourishing life through gardening. And so I want to introduce that as part of the super grief journey. And we talk about that in our retreats as well.
Mhm.
So it's an invitation. I guess that's
Yeah.
what all this say is that there's an invitation to expand your comfort zone around grief, to understand that you don't have to be in survival mode all the time. You are survival manifested. You've survived 100%. Now what?
Mhm. Yeah.
Right? So this is the now what invitation. And that's the place I've reached. And it works for me. Maybe it won't work for everybody. But if one person can be inspired to open to a different perspective and reimagining of what grief can be, then I think we can reconnect with our purpose and use our grief to channel that purpose into beautiful things in the name of our child, our parent, our friend, our partner, our loved one. Um, and then you're a team. You're doing it together.
Right. Absolutely. Beautiful. Thank you again for taking the time today to go through that. And I know people are going to realize that that's just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to what you have to offer. And so they should be checking out your resources.
I've just started. If you want to find the book, it's only in digital format. You go to losttraveler.org, and that's in Cameron's honor as well. Speaking of Cameron's feast again, I wanted to honor him because he had grave concerns about the environment and the use of
Yes.
plastics and carbon footprint and what it takes to produce a paper book in the materials alone,
Mhm.
right? Trees that have to
Exactly.
be felled to make the paper, the bleaching and the toxic inks and chemicals and the plasticizing of the cover and then bubble wrapping it or shrink wrapping it and then putting it in cardboard, which is more trees, and then sending it across the world, shipping,
Mm.
in
Yeah.
fuel and all that stuff for one book. Better download it. If you need a paper book, take it to your local printer, support your local economy, right? Have them bookletize it for you. And then you're supporting a local economy, you're supporting local business people, and it's a cycle. It creates a new cycle of awareness and waste that we need to be shifting now to. So that's why it's only in digital format. And it's bundled, the book and the workbook together.
And we'll make sure we have the link for that as well so that people can get that. And yeah, again, thank you very much for taking the time and sharing all your wisdom today. And I want to thank everyone for watching, and bye for now.